Hey y'all, so this is the continuation of the hold on, I gotta look this up. Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Basically like the Iran nuclear deal. It's just keeping them from gaining nuclear weapons. I know they were taken out of that, or they actually left the agreement at some point. Iran did, and then Trump just put sanctions. What in 2018, I think he put sanctions on, like full sanctions, a maximum pressure campaign or something like that on them, because we just looked at that on the Wikipedia page. I just looked at a few uh, things here, like this top part, because I was just kind of curious about it. But anyway, let's keep going. Uh, I think he tried to prevent them from having any nuclear ever. And then Biden came in, took the sanctions off. So anyway, you would just have to kind of like go back into the history of all of that stuff. And then they became emboldened to do all the things that they were doing after that. But here we go. So let's see. C is transparency and confidence building measures consistent with the respective roles of the president and Majlis or parliament. Iran will provisionally apply the additional protocol to its comprehensive safeguards agreement in accordance with Article 17B of the additional protocol, proceed with its ratification within the time frame as detailed in Annex V, and fully implement the modified Code 3.1 of the subsidiary arrangements to its safeguard agreement. Iran will fully implement the roadmap for clarification of past and present outstanding issues agreed with the IAEA, consistent or containing arrangements to address past and present issues of concern relating to its nuclear program as raised in the annex to the IAEA report of 8th of November 2011, and then full implementation of activities undertaken under the roadmap by Iran will be completed by 15th of October 2015, and subsequently the Director General will provide by 15th of December 2015 the final assessment on the resolution of all past and present outstanding issues to the Board of Governors, and the E3 plus 3 in their capacity as members of the Board of Governors will submit a resolution to the Board of Governors for taking necessary action with the view to closing the issue without prejudice to the competence of the Board of Governors. Iran will allow the IAEA to monitor the implementation of the voluntary measures for their respective durations, as well as to implement transparency measures as set out in the JCPOA and its annexes. These measures include a long-term IAEA presence in Iran, IAEA monitoring for uranium ore concentrate provided by Iran from all uranium ore concentrate plants for 25 years, containing and surveillance of centrifuge rotors and bellows for 20 years, use of IAEA approved and certified modern technologies, including online enrichment, measurement, and electronic seals, and a reliable mechanism to ensure speedy resolution of IAEA access concerns for 15 years as defined in Annex I. Iran will not engage in activities including at the R&D level that could contribute to the development of a nuclear explosive device, including uranium or plutonium metallurgy, metallurgy, sorry, metallurgy, good grief, activities as specified in Annex I. I just can't say that word. Metallurgy. I know it has to do with metal. It's just like I can't say the word. So Iran will cooperate and act in accordance with the procurement channel in this JCPOA as detailed in Annex, I guess it's 4, yeah, endorsed by the UN Security Council resolution. Okay, sanctions. 18th, the UN Security Council resolution endorsing this JCPOA will terminate all provisions of previous UN Security Council resolutions on the Iranian nuclear issue: 1696, 1737, 1747, 1803, 1835, 1929, and 2224, simultaneously with the IAEA verified implementation of agreed nuclear related measures by Iran, and will establish specific restrictions as specified in Annex, I guess it's 5. So it looks like they're using Roman numerals here. Okay. So the EU will terminate all provisions of the EU regulations as subsequently amended, implementing all nuclear related economic and financial sanctions, including related designations, simultaneously with the IAEA verified implementation of agreed nuclear related measures by Iran as specified in Annex V V or 5, which cover all sanctions and restrictive measures in the following areas as described in Annex 2. Okay, so transfers of funds between EU persons and entities, including financial institutions on Iranian persons and entities, including financial institutions. 2 is banking activities, including the establishment of new correspondent banking relationships and the opening of new branches and subsidiaries of Iranian banks in the territories of EU member states. 3, provision of insurance and reinsurance. 4 will be supply of specialized financial messaging services, including SWIFT, for persons and entities set out in Attachment 1 to Annex 2, including the Central Bank of Iran and Iranian financial institutions. Financial support for trade with Iran, export credit guarantees or insurance. 6, commitments for grants, financial assistance, and concessional loans to the government of Iran. 7 would be transactions in public or public guaranteed bonds. 8 is import and transport of Iranian oil, petroleum products, gas, and petrochemical products. 9 would be export of key equipment or technology for the oil, gas, and petrochemical sectors. 10, investment in the oil, gas, and petrochemical sectors. And then 11, export of key naval equipment and technology. 12, design and construction of cargo vessels and oil tankers. 13, provision of flagging and classification services. 14, access to EU airports of Iranian cargo flights. 15, export of gold, precious metals, and diamonds. 16, delivery of Iranian banknotes and coinage. 17, export of graphite, raw or semi-finished metal such as aluminum and steel, and export or software for integrating industrial processes. 18 is designation of persons, entities, and bodies, asset freeze, and visa ban set out in Attachment 1 to Annex 2. And what is that, 19? Associated services for each of the categories above. So there's 20. The EU will terminate all provisions of the EU regulation implementing all EU proliferation related sanctions, including related designations 8 years after adoption or when the IAEA has reached the broader conclusion that all nuclear material in Iran remains in peaceful activities, whichever is earlier. 21, the United States will cease the application and will continue to do so in accordance with the JCPOA of the sanctions specified in Annex 2 to take effect simultaneously with the IAEA verified implementation of the agreed nuclear-related measures by Iran as specified in Annex 5. And then such sanctions cover the following areas as described in Annex 2. So financial and banking transactions with Iranian banks and financial institutions as specified in Annex 2, including the Central Bank of Iran and specified individuals and entities identified as government of Iran by the Office of Foreign Asset Control on the specially designated nationals and blocked persons list, SDN list, as set out in Attachment 3 to Annex 2, including the opening and maintenance of correspondence and payable through accounts at non-U.S. financial institutions, investments, foreign exchange transactions and letters of credit, transactions in Iranian rial, I guess it's their currency, provisions of U.S. banknotes to the government of Iran, bilateral trade limitations on Iranian revenues abroad, including limitations on their transfer, purchase, subscription to, or facilitation of the issuance of Iranian sovereign debt, including governmental bonds, financial messaging services to the Central Bank of Iran and Iranian financial institutions set out in Attachment 3 to Annex 2, underwriting services, insurance and reinsurance, efforts to reduce Iran's crude oil sales, investment, including participation in joint ventures, goods, services, information, technology, and technical expertise, and support for Iran's oil, gas, and petrochemical sectors, purchase, acquisition, sale, transportation, or marketing of petroleum, petrochemical products, and natural gas from Iran, export, sale, or provision of refined petroleum products and petrochemical products to Iran, transactions with Iran's energy sector, transactions with Iran's shipping and shipbuilding sectors and port operators, trade in gold and other precious metals, trade with Iran in graphite, raw, or semi-finished metals such as aluminum and steel, coal, and software for integrating industrial processes, sales, supply, or transfer of goods and services used in connection with Iran's automotive sector, sanctions on associated services for each of the above categories or categories above, and remove individual and entities set out in Attachment 3 to Annex 2 from the SDN list, the foreign sanctions evaders list, and or the non-SDN. What is that list? Yeah, I mean, I looked at the title. Okay, Iran Sanctions Act list and terminate executive orders 13,574, 13,590, 13,622, and 1365 or 645, and sections 5 through 7 and 15 of Executive Order 13,628. 22, the United States will, as specified in Annex 2 and in accordance with Annex 5, allow for the sale of commercial passenger aircraft and related parts and services to Iran. Licensed non-U.S. persons that are owned or controlled by a U.S. person to engage in activities with Iran consistent with this JCPOA, and license the importation into the United States of Iranian origin carpets and foodstuffs. 8 years after adoption day, or when the IAEA has reached the broader conclusion that all nuclear material in Iran remains in peaceful activities, whichever is earlier, the United States will seek such legislative action as may be appropriate to terminate or modify to effectuate the termination of the sanctions specified in Annex 2 on the acquisition of nuclear-related commodities and services for nuclear activities contemplated in this JCPOA to be consistent with the U.S. approach to other non-nuclear weapons states under the NPT, or Non-Proliferation Treaty. Yeah, I don't remember how to say it. Okay. The EU or E3 and EU and the United States specify in Annex 2 a full and complete list of all nuclear related sanctions or restrictive measures and will lift them in accordance with Annex 5. Annex 2 also specifies the effects of the lifting of sanctions beginning on implementation day. If at any time following the implementation day, Iran believes that any other nuclear related sanction or restrictive measures of the E3 or EU plus 3 is preventing the full implementation of the sanctions lifting, as specified in this JCPOA, the JCPOA participant in question will consult with Iran with a view to resolving the issue, and if they concur that lifting of this sanction or restrictive measure is appropriate, the JCPOA participant in question will take appropriate action. If they're not able to resolve the issue, Iran and any member of the E3 or EU plus 3 may refer the issue to the Joint Commission. If a law at the state or local level in the United States is preventing the implementation of the sanctions lifting, as specified in this JCPOA, the United States will take appropriate steps, taking into account all available authorities with a view to achieving such implementation. The United States will actively encourage officials at the state or local level to take into account the changes in the U.S. policy reflected in the lifting of sanctions under this JCPOA and to refrain from actions inconsistent with this change in policy. The EU will refrain from reintroducing or reimposing the sanctions that it has terminated, implementing under this, or implementing under this JCPOA without prejudice to the dispute resolution process provided for under this JCPOA. There will be no new nuclear related UN Security Council sanctions and no new EU nuclear related sanctions or restrictive measures. The United States will make best efforts in good faith to sustain this JCPOA and to prevent interference with the realization of the full benefit by Iran of the sanctions lifting specified in Annex 2. The U.S. administration, acting consistent with the respective roles of the President and the Congress, will refrain from reintroducing or reimposing the sanctions specified in Annex 2 that it has ceased applying under this JCPOA without prejudice to the dispute resolution process provided for under this JCPOA. The U.S. administration, acting consistent with the respective roles of the President and the Congress, will refrain from imposing new nuclear-related sanctions. Iran has stated that it will treat such a reintroduction or reimposition of the sanctions specified in Annex 2 or such an imposition of new nuclear-related sanctions as grounds to cease performing its commitments under this JCPOA in whole or in part. The E3 or EU plus 3 will take adequate administrative and regulatory measures to ensure clarity and effectiveness with respect to the lifting of sanctions under this JCPOA. The EU and its member states, as well as the United States, will issue relevant guidelines and make publicly accessible statements on the details of sanctions or restrictive measures which have been lifted under this JCPOA. The EU and its member states and the United States commit to consult with Iran regarding the content of such guidelines and statements on a regular basis and whenever appropriate. The E3 or EU plus 3 and Iran commit to implement this JCPOA in good faith and in a constructive atmosphere based on mutual respect, and to refrain from any action inconsistent with the letter, spirit, and intent of the JCPOA that would undermine its successful implementation. Senior government officials of the E3 or EU plus 3 and Iran will make every effort to support the successful implementation of this JCPOA, including in their public statements The E3 or EU plus 3 will take all measures required to lift sanctions and will refrain from imposing exceptional or discriminatory regulatory and procedural requirements in lieu of the sanctions and restrictive measures covered by the JCPOA. The EU and its member states and the United States, consistent with their respective laws, will refrain from any policy specifically intended to directly and adversely affect the normalization of trade and economic relations with Iran, inconsistent with their commitments not to undermine the successful implementation of this JCPOA. The E3 and EU plus 3 will not apply sanctions or restrictive measures to persons or entities for engaging in activities covered by the lifting of sanctions provided for in this JCPOA, provided that such activities are otherwise consistent with E3, EU plus 3 laws and regulations in effect. Following the lifting of sanctions under this JCPOA, as specified in Annex 2, ongoing investigations on possible infringements of such sanctions may be reviewed in accordance with applicable national laws. Consistent with the timing specified in Annex 5, the EU and its member states will terminate the implementation of the measures applicable to designated entities and individuals, including the Central Bank of Iran and other Iranian banks and financial institutions, as detailed in Annex 2 and attachments thereto. Consistent with the timing specified in Annex 5, the United States will remove designation of certain entities and individuals on the specially designated nationals and blocked persons list, and entities and individuals listed on the foreign sanctions evaders list, as detailed in Annex 2 and the attachments thereto. EU and E3 plus 3 countries and international participants will engage in joint projects with Iran, including through IAEA technical cooperation projects in the field of peaceful nuclear technology, including nuclear power plants, research reactors, fuel fabrication, agreed joint advanced R&D such as fusion, establishment of a state-of-the-art regional nuclear medical center, personnel training, nuclear safety and security, and environmental protection as detailed in X3, and they will take necessary measures as appropriate for the implementation of these projects. The E3 or EU plus 3 and Iran will agree on steps to ensure Iran's access in areas of trade, technology, finance, and energy. The EU will further explore possible areas for cooperation between the EU, its member states, and Iran, and in this context, consider the use of available instruments such as export credits to facilitate trade, project financing, and investment in Iran. Implementation plan. So this is number 34. So Iran and the E3 or EU plus 3 will implement their JCPOA commitments according to the sequence specified in Annex 5. The milestones for implementation are as follows. Finalization day is the date on which negotiations of this JCPOA are concluded among the E3 or EU plus 3 in Iran, to be followed promptly by submission of the resolution endorsing this JCPOA to the UN Security Council for adoption without delay. Adoption day is the date 90 days after the endorsement of this JCPOA by the UN Security Council, or such earlier date as may be determined by mutual consent of the JCPOA participants, at which time this JCPOA and the commitments in this JCPOA come into effect. Beginning on this date, JCPOA participants will make necessary arrangements and preparations for the implementation of their JCPOA commitments. Implementation day is the date on which, simultaneously with the IAEA report verifying implementation by Iran of the nuclear-related measures described in sections 15.1 to 1511 of Annex 5. The EU and the United States take the actions described in sections 16 and 17 of Annex 5, respectively, and in accordance with the UN Security Council resolution. The actions described in Section 18 of Annex 5 occur at the UN level. A transition day is the date 8 years after adoption day, or the date on which the Director General of the IAEA submits a report stating that the IAEA has reached the broader conclusion that all nuclear material in Iran remains in peaceful activities, whichever is earlier. On this day or on that date, the EU and the United States will take the actions described in sections 20 and 21 of Annex 5, respectively, and Iran will seek, consistent with the constitutional roles of the President and Parliament, ratification of the additional protocol. UN Security Council Resolution Termination Day is a date on which the UN Security Council resolution endorsing this JCPOA terminates according to its terms, which is to be 10 years from adoption day, providing that the provisions of previous resolutions have not been reinstated. On that date, the EU will take the actions described on Section 25 of Annex 5, and then 35, the sequence and milestones set forth above and in Annex 5 are without prejudice to the direction of JCPOA commitments stated in this JCPOA. Dispute resolution mechanism. If Iran believed that any or all of the E3 or EU plus 3 were not meeting their commitments under this JCPOA, Iran could refer the issue to the Joint Commission for resolution. Similarly, if any of the E3 or EU plus 3 believe that Iran was not meeting its commitments under this JCPOA, any of the E3 EU could do the same. The Joint Commission would have 15 days to resolve the issue unless the time period was extended by consensus. After Joint Commission consideration, any participant could refer the issue to the Ministers of Foreign Affairs if it believes the compliance issue has not been resolved. Ministers would have 15 days to resolve the issue unless the time period was extended by consensus. After joint consideration, in parallel with or in lieu of review of the ministerial level or at the ministerial level, either the complaining participant or the participant whose performance is in question could request that the issue be considered by an advisory board, which would consist of 3 members, 1 each appointed by the participants in the dispute, and a 3rd independent member. The advisory board should provide a non-binding opinion on the compliance issue within 15 days. If after this 30-day process the issue is not resolved, the Joint Commission would consider the opinion of the advisory board for no more than 5 days in order to resolve the issue. If the issue still has not been resolved to the satisfaction of the complaining participant, and if the complaining participant deems the issue to constitute significant non-performance, then the participant could treat the unresolved issue as grounds to cease performing its commitments under the JCPOA in whole or in part, and or notify the UN Security Council that it believes the issue constitutes significant non-performance. Upon receipt of the notification from the complaining participant, as described above, including a description of the good faith efforts the participant made to exhaust the dispute resolution process specified in this JCPOA, the UN Security Council, in accordance with its procedure, shall vote on a resolution to continue the sanctions lifting. If the resolution described above has not been adopted within 30 days of the resolution, then the provisions of the old UN Security Council resolutions would be reimposed unless the UN Security Council decides otherwise. In such event, These provisions would not apply with retroactive effect to contracts signed between any party and Iran or Iranian individuals and entities prior to the date of application, provided that the activities contemplated under and execution of such contracts are consistent with this JCPOA and the previous and current UN Security Council resolutions. The UN Security Council expressing its intention to prevent the reapplication of the provisions if the issue giving rise to the notification is resolved within this period, intends to take into account the views of the states involved in the issue and any opinion on the issue of the advisory board. Iran has stated that if sanctions are reinstated in whole or in part, Iran will treat that as grounds to cease performing its commitments under this JCPOA in whole or in part. That's just one document for this. But anyway, I'll see if I can get some more of this stuff recorded. There's another 29-page one. That's going to take a while, but I'll just get through it, maybe 5 pages at a time or something. Anyway, so it won't be so long because this is kind of like legalese sort of stuff. But anyway, contractual mumbo jumbo. But anyway, I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.